Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Space Camp. Today, we'll be doing a session called Working with Your Team in Postman. And so we'll focus on collaboration, making use of tools within Postman and external integrations to allow us to maximize our collaboration and teamwork. And so that is the general gist of today's session. Go ahead and introduce ourselves. So I'm Sean Keegan. I am a developer advocate here at Postman. I've been here about a year and a half, and part of being a developer advocate means I get to do fun things like hopping on this stream and teaching people about Postman. Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm Matt. I'm part of the solutions engineering team here at Postman. I've been with Postman for a little over 3 years now, and my role is to really work with our customers in more of a technical capacity to help them understand how Postman works and what's valuable about it.
Awesome. Cool. Excuse me. So for today's agenda, we'll talk about a few things. Again, the general gist is collaboration and working with your team. And the first thing is APIs are kind of at the heart of all of that. And we'll touch on that kind of throughout. That won't be like a specific thing, but that'll be an overarching theme that we'll see is how APIs truly become a collaborative effort. Next, we'll talk about leveraging integrations to foster external collaboration. That's a bit of a wordy agenda item, but really I think it'll make a lot of sense as we get going. And then effective collaboration within your team. So we're going to talk about ways that you can make sure you're following best practices. And really just maximizing the efficiency of working with your team. And then to wrap things up, we'll talk about some extra resources. So make sure you have the tools available if you want to continue your learning or just expand upon anything that we talked about. And finally, like I said in the beginning, we will have a Q&A section. So Matt and I will be answering questions live. This isn't a pre-recorded session, so we're live. Things might go funky. Hopefully they don't. But yeah, so you can ask questions throughout the session. We have panelists available to answer during the session, but we might save a few till the end just because if we think they're valuable for everybody, we'll make sure that they get answered. So go ahead and ask those in the Q&A section of the Zoom session. All right. So before we get started, we'd like to do a little poll just to figure out, who's joined us, what's the audience that's attending the Space Camp. Today I'm going to actually launch the poll now. And so this should pop up for you. And it's just asking a few questions so we get an idea of, like I said, who's joining these sessions. So the first question is, how familiar are you with Postman? And, kind of a tiers of answers here. It's either brand new to you, use it a few times, relatively familiar with features, or they're a power user. And lastly, the second question, because we're focused on collaboration and teamwork, we're curious what size teams people are working in. This helps us kind of gauge what to talk about, what features to talk about, but whether you're a team of 1 or 2 or you're a team of 100 plus, the things we'll talk about today are going to be valuable and applicable to everybody. So I'll give it another 5 seconds. So if you haven't answered and really want to get your answers in, go for it. Otherwise, I'm about to stop it here. Cool. So I'm going to stop the poll. And it looks like about 8% are brand new to Postman, 50% say they've can do basic things. 8% of folks said they are daily or power users, so that's kind of exciting. So hopefully even if you're a power user, normally there's still plenty of valuable info for you. And this one is interesting to me. How large is your team? It looks like about 21% or about 20% is small teams of 1 to 3. 50% is in that 4 to 9 range. And then a smattering of other sizes across the board, with 7% of answers being in that 50 plus range. So that's pretty cool to me. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing. And let's go to the next thing. So learning objectives for today. So I know I've been talking a lot and we're gonna jump into stuff in a second. Just wanna make sure we set the stage here for what everyone's gonna be doing and what we plan on teaching. So Today, we'll talk about using version control to collaborate with your team, and kind of hand in hand with that is syncing with a Git repository as a single source of truth. So we'll talk about some, and then the third bullet here, collaborating with external teams via Postman's built-in integrations. So we're going to talk quite a bit about using a version control platform, making sure that your APIs are in sync with your whole team and everyone can be on the same page. Then we'll talk about some of the ways that we can leverage some of the Postman features and functionality. So Matt, you'll probably handle the last 4 bullets. Do you want to jump in and kind of just give a quick breakdown of what we might expect today?
Yeah, for sure. So we can see on that 4th bullet, sharing your API elements in workspaces. So a lot of us might already be very familiar with using collections and environments, but we're going to cover some of the things to think about when working collaboratively and how we can enable that in Postman. We'll look into understanding how that collaboration is existing and what it looks like through the activity feeds. Certainly, as you start to collaborate with more and more people, you really need some control around that. So we'll look at roles and permissions and how we make sure things are set up appropriately. And then we'll also look at in-app comments. So how do we have a conversation around the collaboration that we're doing and keep all of our work in one context?
I said awesome, but I was muted. Cool. Thanks, Matt. All right. So with that said, we kind of have the structure of today's lesson in place. Now let's jump into the interactive learning portion of the session. So I'm going to drop this link in here for everybody to join, but we're going to go to this workspace here. This is the Space Camp workspace. Try to pull it up here. If one of the panelists can drop this link in, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I got it. Okay. Oh, my keyboard turned off. All right. Cool. So I have dropped the link in there, and so I'm going to go ahead and get us into that workspace. So if you click that link, this is where it will take you. This is the Postman Space Camp homepage. Actually, this is where it will take you. This is the homepage, is the overview of the public workspace. You can see if you're a Space Camp previous attendee, you'll notice some of these collections might look familiar. Today, what we're going to talk about is this collection here, this Working with Your Team Pet Store collection. And we highly encourage you to fork this collection, and I'll talk about what that means in a second. Because ultimately what we're going to do today is, kind of showcase how, if Matt and I are a team, how we're going to work together, but also how we can include kind of the global community, as part of our quote unquote team and, working together and having API consumers help us out. So if you come to the Postman Space Camp public workspace, go ahead and click this Working with Your Team collection here. And then I'm going to kind of walk through this forking mechanism. And really what forking means is that I'm going to pull down a copy of this collection into a workspace of my own that I'm able to work on, right? And so if you're working as part of a team, you're probably familiar with this kind of workflow of, Git version control is very similar, where you're pulling down a local copy that allows you to, work on something. So go ahead and fork this collection. You can see here, right? We got quite a few people in this space, and this is a new feature in Postman. So hello to everyone that's joining. Go ahead and fork. So I'm going to show you this workflow. I'm just going to call it Space Camp Fork. And I'm going to pull this into a workspace that Matt and I have already joined and been a part of. So I have it called Space Camp Team Workspace. And I like to keep this button checked here for watching original collection. This is going to be pretty important because later at the end of the session, this collection may change, and we want you to see how you can get notified when things are changed and being able to pull in updates. So highly recommend both forking and watching this collection. So I'm going to fork it. This is now going to go into this team workspace that Matt and I have already created. And so if you're familiar with Postman, this shouldn't be anything too out of the ordinary. But if you're not, a team workspace is just an area where Matt and I are going to do our Postman work together here. So there's really not much in here other than this collection I just put in. As you can see, this is where Matt and I are going to work on collaborating on our awesome API. Spoiler alert, it is going to be a pretty basic API, but the focus of today is just showing the collaboration aspects. Yeah, so I'm going to leave this collection alone for now, and we'll see later on how we can kind of like pull changes and get the updates from the collection. But the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of creating an API in Postman, having it be in a spot where Matt and I can both work on it, but then recognizing that this is not just, you know, a 1 or 2 person endeavor, right? Like we want to make sure that if we're working on this API and we also have teammates working on this API elsewhere outside of Postman, that there's some sort of opportunity or place where you know, we can all do that together. So let's start by just creating an API. So I'm going to go to this API section. And if you're not familiar, right, this is just collections are probably the thing people are most familiar with. APIs are going to be, excuse me. This is where we're going to define our API. We can have our schema. This is where we're going to be able to kind of manage the different versions, generate collections from this API, and so forth. So I'm going to create an API, and this is what Matt and I are going to work on together. Let's call it, you know, if you're not familiar, a pet store API is a pretty standard, just kind of like a demo API. And let's give it a version called 1.00. I'm just going to create the API. So I could import it this way, but I'm going to just showcase this idea of like, you know, defining an API from within Postman itself. Right, so these are all the things we could do. We could draft our schema, load out the API, and add API elements. And so Matt's going to talk about, you know, some of these other things later. For now, let's just go ahead and get this API synced up to what we're looking for. Okay. So now I have this bare bones version of my API. It's, you know, I haven't imported anything yet. So right now, if I look at this 1.0 version, and I look at the schema, it's going to come with some boilerplate sample schema here. And this is, you know, not necessarily what I want. So I'm going to find a little bit more of an advanced version of this demo API. And I'll drop this link in for folks if you want to copy the same one. It looks like Joyce just passed it on for you. This is the, you know, sample YAML file. I'm just going to go to the raw tab and copy this from here. And again, so, you know, a lot of this stuff that I'm showing you, I'm just kind of copying and pasting this schema in here, or sorry, my definition here. And now I have just like a little bit more of an advanced definition. So I'm going to save this. Again, nothing I've done so far is collaborative, right? This is me just kind of coming into a team workspace, changing the definition of our API. And, you know, because Matt's in here, right? If I were to show you in my workspace, I'm going to back up a little bit and just show you that, you know, in the workspace, I'm the only contributor, but I do have another person in here with me. I'm not showing it properly. Matt, how can I show folks that you're in here with me?
So it's effectively done through the fact that the entire team can access it. And okay, when I drop in just a few minutes, I'll become a contributor to that workspace, and then I'll show up. Cool.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, so Matt hasn't done anything in the workspace yet, so that's why we're not seeing his contributions. Yeah, okay, so from here, right, you know, Matt could come in and change this himself. You know, anybody that's part of this team workspace could come in and change it. And that's great for, you know, collaborating within Postman, but, you know, often that's not going to be, you know, enough if other folks outside of just Matt and I are working on this API definition. So now that we've created a new API, the next thing we're going to do is sync this with, you know, a version control platform. And, you know, most people are familiar with the Git version control, such as, you know, GitLab or Azure DevOps or GitHub. So what I'm going to do is find this button here called Connect Repository. I'm going to click this dropdown, and you can see these are the 4 built-in integrations where you can connect to a Git version control platform. In my case, I'm going to go with GitHub because I've actually already set up, and I'll show you before connecting here. Well, actually, I'll go ahead and do it. I'm going to connect to GitHub. And now it just says that, I'm leaving Postman. I'm giving an authorization to connect to GitHub. And now, Postman is authorized to access my GitHub account or that connection. So I'll just show you briefly. I've already created this, this repo, right? So I have this pet store demo repo. This is where our team, so Matt and I are part of this. But you can imagine, right, if you're part of a bigger team, this is kind of going to be home base for our API and keeping everything in sync and our source of truth. So what I'm going to do is, here's my API version, and now I'm going to take this API and sync it with GitHub. So for this, it's just my personal GitHub. The repository we just saw was pet store demo. Pet store demo repo. You can see I've done this a few times, so there's a few other ones in there. Right, so now we can talk about branching. Right, so you're able to keep various branches. If you're familiar with Git version control, right, we have different branches. In this case, there's not much in there, so I'm going to use main as both the main branch and development branch, just because it's a basic repo right now with no branches. And one of the things that Postman will handle for us is this ability to create directories for the different schemas and collections that we want to add in. So I'm going to go ahead and connect this repository. Right, and you see that it's going to commit and push changes to main, which is exactly what I want right now. I have to rename the schema file. Let's just call it pet store schema and adding schema file. That will be my commit message. So when I click commit and push, this is actually going to take this file that I created in Postman and push it directly to this GitHub repository that I just showed you. So if I come here now, I'm just going to refresh this page, and we should see, right, now I have this Postman schemas directory with a commit 16 seconds ago. And why is this valuable, right? If my team is primarily working out of GitHub and they're not using Postman, and they want to come in, say we have a team that's just working on the README and not necessarily the definition of anything, or they decide they want to change the schema from here and they're working in their own environment. Now they know what we've created in Postman, but now it lives on GitHub. So let's come back to this API that we were just working on. And let's say we were going to change the definition from within here, right? Let's say instead of Swagger Pet Store, let's just make a very basic change, and let's just add an exclamation point and say this is actually what the title is supposed to be. So if I save this, again, this is, Matt could have done this. Anybody in this Postman team workspace can make this change. And now this schema is going to be different than what lives on GitHub. And, if we want to ensure that our team is able to work with the same source of truth, it's important to make sure that this stays in sync with the GitHub repo. So I'm actually going to refresh this page again here, just to showcase that we have something that should be changed. And if you notice here, this said 0, before. And so the up arrow represents something that's in Postman that can be pushed up to that repo that represents a change. And if this down arrow had a 1 or something that was more than 0, that would indicate that we have changes that we want to pull down from GitHub or from whatever version control platform we were using into this to keep everything in sync. So it really is a two-way sync that allows you to keep your Postman schemas and collections in line with everything you have on GitHub. So your team never has to worry about things being out of sync or working with the wrong version. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and just showcase that I can go ahead and commit and push. And again, this is an extremely minor change, right? This is just adding an exclamation point, but it tells us that we have a modified file. And we'll just say modified name. I'll commit and push this. And And I'll come back to GitHub now and I'll showcase a few things here. So if I refresh this page, we should see that our title changes. Right, awesome. And the other thing to show is, right, so say people, outside of me and Matt, or Matt and myself were working on this, and they changed the YAML file in their own environment outside of Postman and changed something on GitHub. And again, it's going to be me just doing this, but you can hopefully imagine somebody else coming through and being like, you know what? We actually think that the limit should be a max of 200 for this. And they changed this in their own environment. And then, they committed and say, update max number. And they committed. And so whatever they did, they changed the schema and then pushed this to GitHub. Well, now GitHub is ahead of what I have available in my team workspace. And so I'm going to refresh again just to make sure that it gets it in as expected, because right now it looks like there's 0 things to pull in. So let's just refresh and make sure that we have an updated picture. And we can see that I do have, one one thing that I can pull in from GitHub. Right, so I'm going to pull right now. We see like in Postman, it says 100 as my max. And this basic pull is just going to get the changes from main and update our schema in Postman directly from GitHub. Right, so I'm going to pull these changes, and now we see the max is 200. And yeah, so that kind of is a very basic workflow of showing, keeping your collection or keeping your schemas rather from Postman and whatever your version control platform is in sync with each other. And yeah, I don't know, Matt, do you want to chime in with any, like I said, this is a pretty trivial example, but maybe a real life, work, what is the phrase I'm looking for?
Workflow or scenario?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of organizations and a lot of folks, they sometimes already have ways that they're working with Swagger, OpenAPI, any of the other definition types, a chosen way of editing. And often those definitions end up in Git. But increasingly we're seeing that it's really useful to have the definition in Postman as well. And really you need that flexibility to be able to work with, whichever tool is your preference to get what you need. And so this sync has just been really useful in making that journey much more frictionless.
Cool. So one question that came up, and I think it's worth answering, I actually don't know the answer offhand, but Matt, maybe you do, is are you able to commit without pushing?
So yeah, I think it's just a commit and push option right now. Yeah. So when you click on the integration itself, it's quite simple and makes it kind of effective and easy to use. So those of you that know like every possible Git command, it's not fully blown in that sense, and it's designed to kind of support the sync and keep things simple. So yeah, it's a connected commit and push.
Cool. All right, and then the last thing I want to do before I pass along everything to Matt is just showcase this idea of, right, so I'm going to generate a collection from this API. And what this is going to do is, right, so right now, I'll back up a tiny bit, right? The only collection I have in here is that collection that I forked from our public workspace. What I'm going to do now is generate a collection. Let's just say it's for documentation. And let's call it pet store documentation collection. And the reason I'm doing this is so that when Matt takes over, you'll see that like I've generated a collection from our API, and Matt will be able to edit that, do whatever he wants with it. And there's also going to be, so now I have this collection here, and right, if I were to push this off to GitHub, then my team can see that there is now a collection available. Matt and I can both make changes from within our repo. So I'm going to go ahead and commit and push this, and we'll say added collection for documentation. And I'll show again just quickly that we have in our repo, right? So now we're going to have in our Postman directory, we have a schemas directory and we have a collections directory that keeps track of everything that we've added. So everything should be in sync now in terms of our repo, in terms of our API within Postman and GitHub. And that's kind of a basic overview of some of the ways you can sync and keep everything in line with each other. So I'm going to let Matt go ahead and take over and talk about some of the ways that we can now work best with each other in Postman.
Sounds good. Thanks very much. So we'll switch over here. And so I'm in the same workspace that Sean was in, right? And as we think about actually how we collaborate and work together in Postman, the workspace is really a large part of this. So we alluded to this kind of right at the beginning of the session here about how this was a team workspace where we could come together. What I wanted to talk about initially was just to get into that in a little bit more detail. So for a lot of you, you might be used to a Postman workspace, not from a collaborative sense, but more as just of a way to stay organized. And that really is a big part of workspaces, right? If we had all of our collections, all of our APIs within one workspace, it can get quite messy. So we seek to organize our work through use of these workspaces. However, once we start to think about working together in Postman and not just in isolation, these workspaces are really the vehicle for us to actually come together and collaborate on things, right? So when we land in a workspace, we can kind of dig into really what it's intended for in a couple of different places. So Sean pointed out, we've got this workspace overview where we can kind of provide a description of what's happening. And in this case, we can really understand from just that it's intended for the both of us to come together and collaborate. But in addition to that, we can dig into the core settings of Postman to understand that. So in the top right-hand corner here, there's a workspaces settings button. If I click on that, that brings us into this location where we can really manage how this collaboration is going to work and set this workspace up for that in the first place. So this revolves around two items in here, right? One is this visibility, which we can see is set to team. And then the second is who is involved in this workspace. So starting with the first point here, the visibility, we'll see that there's a number of different types of workspaces. Really what we're focused on today is this idea of a team workspace where multiple people can come together. And then we've got the types of workspaces that you're probably already familiar with. So the personal workspaces where it's just you and you're working in isolation. For those of you who went in and forked the collection right at the start of the session, you're accessing a public workspace, which is intended for much broader collaboration, maybe outside of your direct team. There's the concept of a private workspace. And depending on what version of Postman you're using, this may or may not be accessible to you, but it effectively allows you to create an invite-only workspace, which kind of creates collaboration only for a select few. So sometimes collaboration needs to be more confidential or should be tucked away from the broader organization or other teams. So these workspace visibilities are really designed to enable the right kind of collaboration, or none at all if you just want to do something individually. Whenever we're selecting one of the collaborative workspace types, so private, team, public, that's when we can come in and determine who should be a part of that workspace, right? So by default, when we create a team workspace, it automatically brings everyone in the team together collectively. But we can also select other individuals if we want to give them a different role within the workspace. And in some Postman versions, this may also look like different groups that you can invite as well. So really the purpose here is if we want to start breaking down responsibilities within the workspace, at the moment it's just me and Sean, but if we start thinking about adding other people, it might be that we don't actually want to give them enough access to come in and edit our collections or change things. We just want them to come in and view. So you'll see that when you click on this drop down here, there are different roles available that you can select for individuals. So this means you can really break down the workspace and set it up in much more of a best practice way. This becomes particularly relevant the more and more people you start to collaborate with, right? Between me and Sean, it's going to be quite easy. We can speak to each other. We're not going to step on each other's toes too much. But if we started to really work with a lot of other people, sometimes we see tens of people in a workspace, sometimes hundreds, then we need to think much more carefully about who can do what. And these roles are inherited into everything that we see in the workspace. So you might have seen these previously in Postman. They have changed a bit with the most recent update that we did in terms of that they are inherited. So for someone like Sean, who's an admin, that means everything that can be found within the workspace, he has permission to go in and do what he wants with. And so these roles feed into all the assets and elements that exist within the workspace. So outside of just the kind of workspace configuration, we can kind of fine tune and make other changes as well. So sometimes applying these types of roles and permissions at an overall workspace level doesn't make sense, and there's individual things that we want to change. So you'll find that, for any collection, you can come in, you can manage roles on collections individually, so you can make exceptions to that rule that you're creating at the workspace level. This applies to environments, the actual APIs themselves. And so there's a lot of control in here to really manage collaboration in the right ways and to help make sure that it will stay effective over time. So now that we've spoken in a bit more detail about the workspaces themselves, like how we can configure those roles and permissions, we really need to think about, okay, how do we actually manage the change of these collections and assets over time, and what does that look like in a best practice format, right? We saw Sean making some edits to the API definition, but what about other things like our collections that we're really used to working with day to day? If we're in this team setting and I'm thinking about editing this pet store documentation that was generated from the definition, I could just come in here and start making edits to this documentation straight away, right? There are potentially pros and cons to doing this, right? Like, I can update my documentation very quickly. Everyone gets to see the change. But if I'm starting to edit other aspects of the collection, maybe adding other requests, maybe I'm getting into scripting and things like that, I want to be really careful about how I change this collection, right? If we start to bring more people in here to collaborate, I might just change this collection kind of and pull the rug from everyone, and it changes in an unexpected way that they're not used to. And worse than that, I might actually break something, right? So what we see as a really common pattern is a lot of people being given that viewer role within workspaces. And it really enforces this best practice idea of forking elements in Postman and changing them in that capacity. So in order to do that, I'm going to hit these 3 dots on the collection, view more actions menu, come down and hit create fork. I need to, just as when Sean was forking the collection from the public workspace, I have to provide a label to this. This is going to be meaningful to the change you're making. And also I need to select a workspace where I want to actually evolve that fork. For the purposes of this, we'll just work with a really simple label, and we'll keep it within the workspace we're already working within. I'm also going to keep this watch button checked. This is more useful in a team collaboration setting if there are other people who are contributing to this collection and they merge their fork before mine. It would be useful for me to know about that sooner rather than later so that I can integrate those changes. So I'll fork the collection here. And now we'll see that, we effectively have a duplicate of that original collection, but this one is clearly a fork. We can see that label here that we created. And so this really gives me that safe space to go away and propose my changes. And that could really look like anything in here, right? So when we come into the documentation, we'll see that this looks quite sparse. So, I can come in here and start to make changes here, right? So I think we were describing this as an awesome API. So let's call this an awesome API for pets and save this description down. And I could come in here and start to really make as many changes as I would like, right? What we'll do, just for the sake of kind of understanding how the collection can evolve over time, is actually come into one of these requests and make quite a different change, just so we can observe, what change looks like over time. I'll come into the test scripts tab here, which is a way for us to, in a more programmatic way, understand that our requests are working as we expect. And I'll put a basic check in here to assert that we expect this request to get a 200. Now, with these changes done to the collection, I can be quite happy with them. But with the fork, this provides me this avenue to really ensure that these are the changes that we want to make in this collection. And the way that I can do that is, very similar to flows within Git that we see. So once you have a fork in Postman, you can then create a pull request. So I'm going to open up a pull request here. I can give it a title. I can give it a description. These support Markdown, so you can do all your fancy stuff with code snippets, screenshots, things like that. I can come in here and select someone to review it. In this case, I think it makes most sense that Sean reviews it. So I'll open up the PR. And here I get a really nice semantic diff that helps me understand how this collection is evolving over time. Now, for some of you, you might have worked with collections directly in Git and going through flows that were a bit more involved than the super smooth flow that Sean showed us. And you'll have seen that collections can be quite difficult to really make sense of as they change. So having this semantic diff in Postman is really nice. It helps us understand the change that we're making. And so when we go ahead and think about merging this PR, we can be really confident in the changes that we're making. So within the PR, we have this capacity to come in and leave comments on the PR. So this means that we can, pretty much work entirely within Postman in order to further this collection. We don't have to jump into other contexts to have the conversation about this that then misses the actual code change. It keeps everything in one place so we can keep that conversation tied up. And I can come in and I can specifically tag in here, and this will provide notifications such that when you tag folks in here, they know that they're being brought into the conversation and that there's something for them to do. So I can just put a generic comment in here, but this can be drilled right into the depths of code review or deciding language for the API documentation. So I'll put that comment in there. Sean will get that, and he can get back to me with his thoughts, and it really allows us to properly progress this PR. When we get to a point that we're happy with it, it gets approved, and we decide to merge, there are a lot of things that exist within this entire flow that can help us manage this change properly. So let's say that original collection did change without me realizing it. Maybe I missed the notifications from the watch. This will allow me to resolve conflicts going through this flow. I can pull changes and all of that good stuff that you would expect through version control. So what we've been looking at here by going through the collaboration flows in the workspace itself is quite focused on those of us that are really working directly with the API. Often, we can refer to those folks as API producers. But what Postman is really aiming to do is to help both API producers and API consumers, the people who are using the APIs, implementing the APIs, to really work together quite closely. So these workspaces are definitely suitable for both of these groups to come together and make sense of APIs. But there's also ways that we can improve our collaboration with those API consumers, such that they can discover our APIs more effectively and that they can get their hands on these resources much more quickly. So if I move back into the APIs tab and take a look at the API we're putting together here, you'll see that on this overview page, there's mention that this API isn't on the private API network. Now, the private API network is effectively like an internal catalog of all the APIs within your team, and it's really focused towards these API consumers. So I can choose to add this API to our private API network. I can promote it or publish it to that space. And what it means is that when we first land in our shared instance of Postman, rather than having to think about what workspace I need to enter as an API consumer to find the API I need to interact with and uncover the right resource, I can immediately come into this private API network. And it's just a case of discovery. So I can filter through APIs, I can sort them, and I can find that exact API that I want to interact with. And I can come into that. I can see the different versions available, dive into those and find kind of the attached resources that are going to be most useful to me as a consumer. So that's things like the definition itself and the documentation as well. So this is a really great method to collaborate with those folks who are more focused on consuming the API than necessarily contributing to its production. So I think that's all I have to kind of add from an internal team collaboration perspective. So I'll pause for there and hand things back over to you, Sean.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to end up showing myself back in that same workspace. So let me pull this up. Space key. Cool. All right. So I'm back now in that Space Camp team workspace that Matt just did a bunch of work in. So Matt, I'd love to go through quick some of the things that you tagged me on and some other things that I'd love to make sense of. So one thing you'll notice is, right, if I had this little bell icon here with this notifications, I'm going to click this because Matt tagged me in something. So I should be able to see these notifications and see what's going on. So I'm going to view this pull request, right? And this is just kind of showing the other end of that workflow. So Matt made some changes, tagged me, says, what do I think? This looks great to me. So I'm going to say, this looks great. And now the workflow, Matt, I should approve this and then merge. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, you can use that approve mechanism if you've got multiple people who are coming in and wanting to review. You can also just straight up merge it as well, and it will depend on that role and permission level that's assigned to you.
Cool. So let's go ahead and merge this. I'm going to, the destination will be updated. So yeah, let's stick with this, Matt, the default here.
Yeah, these are different merge strategies, really. So you can choose any. The top one's just fine.
Cool. So let's go with that. So now my mergers were changed. And now if I were to look at this one,
yep.
Right? This was the original one. So now this should have, because I merged and improved, I should have these tests in here that Matt added. Right. So again, this is a relatively straightforward, relatively basic, pull request into a merge flow, right? Like Matt just added a test, but you can imagine as you're, working with larger teams and you're adding more robust functionality into your APIs, this test suite and other changes can become even larger. And so one other thing I wanted to show, Matt, was, we had, if I go back and now look at the Postman Space Camp, actually, I'll stick with my regular page here. And I go back to my notifications tab, I can see that that collection, working with your team, pet store collection, has been modified. And this was that original tab in Space Camp. So if I wanted to, is there a way, Matt, where I can take these changes? So if I go to this actual collection now, I can see that this is a little bit different than how I had it, than what it looked like when I originally forked it. So what can I do here if I want to get those changes into this collection?
Yeah, exactly. So effectively, you'll need to go into that that collection menu again, so that you can pull the changes. So yeah, the view more actions, the 3 dots that you get for a collection, you'll see that there's a pull changes option in there. So if you hop into that will allow you to get any updates that have come from or have been made in the public workspace. Awesome.
So yeah, so for those folks at home that forked that initial Space Camp collection, we actually changed the collection slightly. We added some test functionality. We've also, you'll see the documentation change. This is where we're going to add a little more info and ask for your feedback. So I'm going to pull the changes, see what pops up here. And we can see, right, the diff pops up and we can see that there's some markdown in here, right? A little bit tough to read as it's not previewed. And we can see that some other tests were added to the various requests. So let's say, yeah, this is actually what we want. I want this version, of the collection. And now, I didn't have to go I don't have to go and check the Space Camp workspace every day to see if there's changes. Right, I got notified that told me that the collection had been modified, and then I was able to pull these changes in here. Right, so if you go ahead and mirror that workflow at home, you'll be able to go ahead and have these changes. That just gives you a little bit more information. And there's a link for the survey feedback. So go ahead and pull those, and at the end, if you want to do that survey, we'll also send that link out in general. So no worries if you didn't pull and fork, or fork and then pull. Cool. So that is all for the instruction part. I just want to make sure that we, just do a quick overview of everything that we learned, because we covered a lot, and then leave a few minutes for the Q&A. Thanks to our panelists. I know most folks have gotten their questions answered, but Matt and I will still cover a few of them in the last few minutes. So in this session, right, the first 3 bullets kind of work together, right? Using version control to collaborate with your team, syncing a Git repository. I showed how to sync with GitHub, and then collaborating with external teams using Postman built-in integrations. So all these were kind of that first portion where, I synced our API with GitHub and showed how it is a two-way sync. So any changes that were made in Postman can be pushed up to your version control platform. And the other way works as well. So changes that were made in GitHub from anybody on your team in that repo, you can also pull those down into Postman as well. And then Matt talked about sharing APIs and workspaces, collections, environments, or API elements. So this is where Matt was forking collections into our own workspace. I was able to see the changes. I could merge changes that he made from his forked collection into the initial collection. Right, we looked at the activity feed and change log, so that gives us that kind of overview of who's doing what and what's changing. Managing roles and permissions. This is where Matt talked about the ability to merge and approve based on who has what access, right, and just having a little bit more control over who can do what in your team. And then the in-app comments, we saw Matt tag me and let me know that a change was available. So that was, I got the notification, and it's just a helpful way to communicate and not have to, operate in lots of different environments, right? We can keep everything in Postman. Okay. So additional resources. So if our panelists can pass these along, we have, the Postman Space Camp workspace. This is what people went to in the beginning to fork that initial collection. Lots of information and resources there. If you want more information in a more formal way in their documentation, this link here, working with your team, that's like the documentation landing page for that. Another great spot is our community forum. We have quite a great community of both Postman folks and non-Postman employees that are highly active. So if you have questions on how to do things, if you're stuck, if you want to showcase something, an event or information on upcoming events, that's all available on the community forum. And then Postman Answers. That is another public workspace that has answers to some of the most commonly asked questions in the form of Postman collections, right? So it gives you this forkable collection that allows you to figure out how to do certain things. And so that's, we're always adding to that. It's a great resource. Cool. So let's make sure, Matt, let's go ahead and answer some of the questions that folks have asked. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask some of the ones that have come up. And are you still seeing the Q&A screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So one of the ones that came up is, Rob asked, so this goes back to the, I think the syncing with GitHub. How can the flow be adapted for projects that use dynamic documentation, which is generated from code? So in this case, the Swagger definition is never actually committed to the repo.
Yeah, so if you look in Postman when you're inside a workspace, there is an import button, and that lets you bring in a definition a number of different ways. It could be via a URL, it could be via a file that you have on your machine. That may or may not be applicable in this situation. We do see some people kind of changing their processes and getting to a point where like they do have their definition end up in the repo, so add an extra step so that other tools can start to make use of it. But effectively we can ingest it in pretty much any way. You could even use our Postman's own API to make an API call to include that definition within Postman. So there's a lot of different avenues, and depending on your exact setup, it will depend on which one of those you'd pick.
Cool. So another question from Damalola asking, is this feature an alternative to GitHub? My first instinct is not necessarily like a full-fledged substitution for GitHub. It kind of works in parallel with your version control platform, something like GitHub.
Yeah, GitHub, you're definitely storing your code there. GitHub's really centered around code. We're more centered around the APIs and the artifacts that you might have attached to those APIs.
Cool. So Nir asked, could you please repeat how we found changes that were made to the workspace that we forked? And so I think this is going to be that workflow of, for me, it was seeing that I had a notification, right? I looked at that bell icon, saw that I was tagged in a comment, and saw that I was added to a pull request, and that allowed me to see in the team workspace. And then also there was the notification because I watched the Spacecamp collection, I was able to see that there was changes made to that collection by looking at the notifications bell. Cool. So I think that's more or less all the unanswered questions. If your question did not get answered, feel free to hop into the community forum, ask your questions there. Like I said, plenty of folks are available to answer questions. These are all fantastic questions. So thank you for asking. Thank you for being engaged throughout. At this point, please, if you haven't, seen this link from pulling updates on the collection, if one of our panelists could drop this link into the chat, please go ahead and fill out this short survey. I think it's like eight quick questions, and we really do take the feedback to heart, and it really helps us guide the next sessions and learning objectives and so forth. And the last thing I want to plug is that we do have an upcoming Spacecamp session. It is Postman, an introduction for testers. And I'm going to pull that up here. Matt, just can you confirm that you're seeing the correct Postman introduction for testers?
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. And Vikram just dropped this in the link. So this is for, for folks that are, identify as testers or not, but, we'll be focusing quite a bit on testing functionality. It's people that are newer to Postman, not new testers per se. So we've run the session like this before, and we're pretty excited for this. And I think there's quite a bit of valuable opportunities to learn in that one as well. And I think that's all. So with that said, I am going to pull up our final cute Postman thank you graphic. Say thank you to everyone for coming. Hopefully we'll see you next month in March for the tester session. Thank you, Matt, for joining. And I think that's all.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Bye, everyone. See you next time.